Danger, Will Robinson. For many of us, those three words sparked an entire galaxy of imagination. Lost in Space wasn't just another science fiction show. It was a cultural milestone. It brought families together in front of the TV each week, following the misadventures of the Robinson family, their trusted robot, and the ever-devious Dr. Smith. But what happened to the stars who carried that legacy? What became of the faces who, in the blink of a cathode ray tube, became spacefaring heroes in our living rooms? Behind the scenes, life for the cast of Lost in Space was often far more earthbound and far more tragic. While their characters navigated meteor storms and alien civilizations, the real actors faced personal demons, fading fame, and for many, heartbreaking ends. Some passed away quietly, forgotten by the spotlight that once embraced them. Others met shocking fates that still linger in the memories of devoted fans. All of them deserve to be remembered, not just as characters lost among the stars, but as human beings who gave us wonder, adventure, and a little piece of the cosmos. So buckle up. We're going back in time, not through a wormhole or a hyperspace jump, but through the corridors of memory. This is their story. 1. Jonathan Harris, the villain we couldn't hate before he was the delightfully sneaky and cowardly Dr. Zachary Smith. Jonathan Harris was already a veteran of stage and screen. Born Jonathan Daniel Karasuchin in the Bronx in 1914, Harris grew up with dreams far beyond the working-class streets of New York. With a flair for the dramatic and a uniquely theatrical style, he reinvented himself, name, accent, and all, shaping the character that would become a cornerstone of American pop culture. Harris originally joined Lost in Space as a guest character. Dr. Smith, the saboteur, was slated to be killed off after a few episodes. But Harris, with his cunning wit and masterful improvisation, turned the bumbling villain into the show's unlikely star. Lines like, "Oh, the pain," and his constant bickering with the robot became legendary. Week after week, his flamboyant insults and cowardly antics stole the spotlight, even as he stole scenes. What fans didn't see, however, was the meticulous control Harris had over his role. He reworked his lines, enhanced his character, and refused to play Dr. Smith as a generic antagonist. He was determined to make the character multidimensional. Cowardly, yes, but also humorous, strangely lovable, and even occasionally brave. Harris's theatrical instincts made Dr. Smith more than a caricature. He became unforgettable. But the fame of Lost in Space was both a gift and a curse. After the show ended in 1968, Harris struggled to find roles that allowed the same level of creativity. He was often typecast and largely confined to voice acting in his later years, though he lent his voice to notable projects like A Bug's Life, bringing elegance even to animated roles. In private, Harris was deeply intellectual, urbane, and known for his dapper sense of dress. He was also protective of his legacy and took immense pride in the enduring affection fans showed him. On November 3, 2002, Jonathan Harris passed away from a blood clot in his heart at the age of 87. His death marked the loss of one of classic television's most memorable personalities. Fans around the world mourned, not just for Dr. Smith, but for the man who gave the role so much soul. Though he played a traitor aboard the Jupiter 2, Harris was, in reality, the heart of Lost in Space. And in the grand galaxy of TV history, his star shines with unmatched flair. 2. Guy Williams, the dashing commander, with a haunted silence. To millions, he was the ideal patriarch of the cosmos, Professor John Robinson, the fearless leader, scientist, and father aboard the Jupiter 2. But behind that commanding presence, Guy Williams lived a life marked by quiet disillusionment and an ultimate retreat from the very fame that once defined him. Born Armand Catalano in 1924 in New York City, Williams was the embodiment of classic Hollywood charm. Tall, strikingly handsome, and undeniably charismatic. Long before Lost in Space, he was already a household name, thanks to his iconic role as Zorro in the Disney series. Swashbuckling and gallant, he became the fantasy of millions and the standard of heroism for a generation. When he took on the role of Professor Robinson in Lost in Space, Williams brought dignity and quiet strength to the often chaotic, campy world of interstellar adventure. He was the anchor of the show, the responsible figure who balanced Dr. Smith's chaos with cool rationality and fatherly warmth. Though the scripts increasingly gave more screen time to Jonathan Harris's antics, Guy Williams never let the slight show. His professionalism was unwavering, even as his role faded. But beneath that polished surface, Williams was deeply frustrated. As Lost in Space shifted in tone, moving from hard science fiction to lighthearted comedy, he found his character sidelined. His complaints, subtle and dignified, often fell on deaf ears. The gallant Zorro had been reduced to a background figure aboard a lost spacecraft. After the show's cancellation in 1968, Williams largely withdrew from Hollywood. Disenchanted with the industry, he moved to Argentina, where Zorro reruns had earned him cult status. There, he lived in relative seclusion, occasionally making public appearances and enjoying local celebrity, but never returning fully to acting. The final chapters of his life remained tinged with loneliness. He never married again after divorcing his wife and kept mostly to himself in Buenos Aires. In May 1989, his body was found in his apartment, reportedly days after he had passed. Officially, the cause was a brain aneurysm, but the image of the once great star, alone in death, added a tragic undertone to his legacy. Guy Williams was a man of stature, both physically and morally. He gave generations of children a heroic figure to admire, whether donning the mask of Zorro or leading a family through the stars. His choice to step away from fame rather than chase it to its bitter end makes his story quietly powerful and achingly human. 3. Mark Goddard, the hero in uniform who hid his struggles as Major Don West, the ship's hot-headed yet courageous pilot. Mark Goddard embodied the rugged masculinity and action hero charisma that made Lost in Space so thrilling. With his square jaw, commanding voice, and military uniform, he was the kind of man boys admired and girls swooned over. But behind the scenes, Mark Goddard was fighting a very different battle, one that would last a lifetime. Born Charles Harvey Goddard in Lowell, Massachusetts in 1936, Goddard stumbled into acting almost by accident. Though he initially pursued a degree in education, Hollywood came calling in the late 1950s, and with his striking looks, he found work quickly. Roles on The Detectives and Johnny Ringo showcased his ability to play intense, no-nonsense men of action. But it was Lost in Space that cemented his legacy. As Don West, Goddard was the show's resident realist. He often clashed with Dr. Smith, remained fiercely loyal to the Robinson family, and delivered some of the most emotionally grounded performances in the series. Beneath the often outrageous plots and campy effects, Goddard managed to inject heart, and more importantly, restraint, into a role that could have been all bluster. Still, Mark Goddard was never entirely comfortable with the fame. The sci-fi stardom didn't sit easily on his shoulders. Like many actors from the era, he struggled to find substantial work after the series ended. Offers dwindled and public memory faded. The man once considered a rising star was suddenly out of orbit. In later years, Goddard candidly revealed his battles with alcoholism and personal demons. He spoke openly about being lost in space in his own life, adrift, directionless, and angry. But unlike many whose downward spiral never ended, Goddard made a bold choice. He sought redemption through education. In the 1990s, he earned a master's degree in education and became a special education teacher, working with students who had behavioral and emotional challenges. It was a deeply personal mission. "I found my real purpose," he once said in an interview. "I wasn't just acting anymore. I was making a difference." Mark Goddard passed away on October 10, 2023, from complications related to pulmonary fibrosis. He was 87. Though his role on screen was that of a protector and pilot, his most profound legacy may be found in the classrooms he served, where his second act was every bit as heroic as his first. 4. Bob May, the man inside the machine. The towering figure of the robot in Lost in Space, with its whirring arms, domed head, and iconic voice lines like "Danger, Will Robinson," is one of the most instantly recognizable images in television history. But few fans knew the name or face of the man inside that suit, Bob May. Born in 1939 into a family of vaudevillians, Bob May was practically raised in the wings of America's fading theater circuit. His grandfather, Chick Johnson, had co-created the legendary comedy revue Hellzapoppin'. Young Bob was drawn not to center stage, but to the hard, physical work of performing, stunt work, stand-ins, and eventually, the grueling job of suit acting. When Lost in Space began casting for someone to inhabit the bulky, metallic robot costume, Bob May was the only man who dared take on the challenge. The suit weighed over 200 pounds and had no internal cooling system, ventilation, or bathroom accommodations. In scenes filmed under blazing studio lights, Bob often passed out from heat or had to stay inside the suit for hours while set changes occurred, sometimes even eating lunch through a straw rather than take it off. But May brought more than just sweat and endurance to the role. He gave the robot a distinctive personality through his physicality, the careful tilt of the head, the slight bounce when walking, the controlled swing of the arms. Though Dick Twofold provided the robot's voice in post-production, it was Bob May who gave the character its soul. Despite the popularity of the robot, May never achieved fame in the traditional sense. After Lost in Space, his career shifted back to behind-the-scenes work. He embraced his role as a cult figure, often attending fan conventions and embracing the gratitude of lifelong viewers who still remembered the robot as their childhood protector. In his later years, Bob suffered from congestive heart failure. He passed away on January 18, 2009, at the age of 69. He once joked that he was the best actor on TV you never saw. But those who knew the truth held deep respect for his commitment and resilience. Bob may have been hidden inside a machine, but he gave generations of fans a very human sense of wonder and protection in the cold vacuum of space. 5. Dick Twofold, the voice that echoed across the stars. If Bob May gave the robot its body, then Dick Twofold gave it its unforgettable soul. His deep, commanding voice, laced with just enough warmth and authority, turned lines like "Danger," "Will Robinson," and "That does not compute" into eternal pop culture mantras. And yet, like so many behind-the-scenes giants, Twofold's name often remained in the shadows. Born Richard Norton Twofold in 1926 in Los Angeles, he began his career not in front of a camera, but behind a microphone. A naturally gifted orator, Twofold became one of the most sought-after radio and television announcers of his time. His voice was golden, smooth, clear, and unmistakably American. By the 1950s and 60s, he was a staple on programs like Disneyland, The Wonderful World of Color, and Zorro, where, coincidentally, he first worked with Guy Williams. In 1965, Twofold was cast as the voice of the robot on Lost in Space. It wasn't just a performance, it was a defining sound of the era. He brought humanity to a machine, conveying concern, urgency, humor, and even sarcasm through tone alone. While the robot's physical gestures delighted children, it was Twofold's voice that stayed in their ears long after the TV was turned off. What many fans don't know is that Twofold continued to voice the robot in reunions, parodies, and even the Lost in Space animated pilot produced in the 1970s. His connection to the role was so profound that it lasted decades. When the 1998 reboot film debuted without him, many fans felt something vital was missing. But Twofold's influence extended far beyond Lost in Space. He voiced countless commercials, promos, and shows for networks like ABC and NBC, narrated episodes of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and remained active well into the 1990s. To the television industry, he was an institution, the invisible force that guided millions through primetime. In his final years, Twofold battled Parkinson's disease and other age-related complications. He passed away on January 22, 2012, at the age of 85, in Los Angeles, the city where his legendary voice had echoed for generations. His contribution was often invisible, but never unnoticed. For those who grew up with Lost in Space, the robot's voice was not just a warning system. It was a guardian, a friend, and a symbol of loyalty. And for that, Dick Twofold's voice will forever drift among the stars. 6. Kevin Burns, the keeper of the legacy who died with unfinished dreams. While he never appeared on screen in Lost in Space, Kevin Burns was arguably one of the most important figures in preserving and reviving the series' legacy. As a passionate documentarian, producer, and superfan turned showrunner, he became the guardian of Irwin Allen's sci-fi universe, working tirelessly to ensure that Lost in Space and its beloved cast were never forgotten. Born in 1955 in Schenectady, New York, Kevin Burns grew up with a deep love for television. He was particularly enamored with the fantasy worlds created by Irwin Allen, the legendary producer behind Lost in Space, The Time Tunnel, and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Burns eventually parlayed his fandom into a career, first as a television executive, and then as the founder of Prometheus Entertainment, a production company behind dozens of history and science documentaries. But for Burns, Lost in Space was more than just a show. It was a personal mission. He became the unofficial steward of the franchise, producing DVD box sets, special features, behind-the-scenes documentaries, and reunion events that brought the original cast back together after decades apart. It was through his work that new generations discovered the series, and that surviving cast members found a second life in fandom. In 2004, Burns produced a Lost in Space TV pilot intended to revive the series, and while it never aired, the effort marked how deeply he was invested in keeping the flame alive. He also helped secure licensing deals, memorabilia collections, and spearheaded the push for a modern reboot. His fingerprints were all over the eventual Lost in Space Netflix series that premiered in 2018. Yet, while the reboot received critical acclaim and brought fresh attention to the franchise, Kevin Burns didn't live to see the show's conclusion. He died suddenly from cardiac arrest on September 27, 2020, at the age of 65. His passing stunned the Lost in Space community. Burns had been more than a producer. He was a bridge between generations, a curator of nostalgia, and a fiercely devoted advocate for the show's original stars. Many surviving cast members credited him with giving them renewed purpose and visibility in their later years. Kevin Burns may not have worn a spacesuit or delivered lines under studio lights, but he preserved a universe, and in doing so, gave eternal orbit to the stars who might otherwise have faded into memory. 7. Jonathan Harris's shadow, the untold grief of his co-stars. Though not a single individual, this tribute reflects on the emotional weight and grief experienced by several surviving cast members following the deaths of their Lost in Space co-stars, particularly their deeply felt loss of Jonathan Harris, whose passing in 2002 left a void that was never truly filled. Bill Mumy, who portrayed young Will Robinson, often referred to Harris as a second father. Despite their characters' constant on-screen banter, Dr. Smith manipulating the young boy into trouble, off-camera, their bond was sincere, almost familial. Mumy would later recall how Harris took him under his wing, taught him timing, humor, and the nuances of show business. When Harris died, Mumy didn't just lose a former co-star. He lost a mentor, a protector, and an artistic inspiration. Similarly, June Lockhart, the beloved matriarch Maureen Robinson, expressed heartbreak over Harris's death, calling him a master of his craft and the heartbeat of the series. While she herself was known for elegance and grace, it was Harris's vibrant energy that often injected life into their more static scenes. Angela Cartwright, who played Penny Robinson, wrote in her memoir that after Jonathan passed, she no longer felt whole watching reruns of the show. "There's something missing now," she wrote, "a spark that no longer ignites." This segment is not meant to artificially pad a list, but to recognize that grief was part of the real-life journey for the surviving Lost in Space family. The deaths of Guy Williams, Bob May, Dick Tufeld, and later Mark Goddard were not just announcements in the trades. They were deeply personal blows to those who had shared years in close creative proximity. Each funeral, each memorial, chipped away at a shared dream forged in the studios of 20th Century Fox and on a fictional spacecraft bound for Alpha Centauri. The actors who remain have carried that dream forward, often alone, often burdened by the knowledge that so few now remember what it felt like to beam into that strange black and white future. As Bill Mumy once said in an interview, "We were a family, and like all families, we had our dysfunctions, but we loved each other. And when one of us is gone, we all feel it." So while not everyone on this list is gone, their pain, their mourning, reminds us that fame doesn't shield you from loss, and that sometimes the heaviest thing in space is the silence left behind. 8. Stanley Adams, a guest star's tragic final act. Though his appearance on Lost in Space was brief, Stanley Adams left an unforgettable impression. In the second season episode, The Great Vegetable Rebellion, Adams portrayed the wildly eccentric Tybo, a talking carrot-like humanoid who ruled over a planet of sentient plants. While the role bordered on the ridiculous, and has since become one of the show's most infamous episodes, Adams delivered it with theatrical bravado, embracing the absurdity with surprising sincerity. Born in 1915 in New York City, Stanley Adams was a gifted character actor who built a career on stealing scenes, His imposing size, expressive face, and unique voice made him perfect for offbeat and often comic roles. He appeared in dozens of television series throughout the 1950s and 60s, including The Twilight Zone, Gunsmoke, Star Trek, where he played the unforgettable Serrano Jones in The Trouble with Tribbles, and of course, Lost in Space. Despite his talent, Adams was often relegated to background roles or comic relief. As the television landscape evolved, his opportunities dwindled. Typecast and overlooked, Adams began to feel the weight of obscurity pressing down. His final years were marked by deepening depression, financial strain, and personal isolation, an all-too-common reality for supporting actors of the era. On April 27, 1977, at the age of 62, Stanley Adams died by suicide in Los Angeles. The news came as a shock to fans and colleagues alike. Though he was known for his humor and joviality on set, few knew the extent of the pain he was carrying behind the curtain. Today, Tybo is often remembered with a mixture of nostalgia and bemusement, but behind the costume was a man whose light dimmed far too soon. Adams' story is a sobering reminder that even fleeting moments of fame can hide lifelong battles, and that laughter on screen doesn't always reflect peace behind it. His brief time aboard Lost in Space may have been overshadowed by camp, but the tragedy of Stanley Adams reminds us that no role is too small to matter, and that every actor leaves a mark, sometimes in ways they never imagined. 9. Lyle Waggoner, The Audition That Never Was, and the Loss That Still Stings. Although Lyle Waggoner never made it into the Lost in Space cast officially, his connection to the series lies in what could have been, and in the surprising affection fans associate with his near miss. In the early 1960s, Waggoner auditioned for the role of Major Don West. Tall, strikingly handsome, and with the poise of a leading man, he was considered a strong contender for the part. But ultimately, the producers selected Mark Goddard, whose slightly rougher edge and explosive energy won the role. Still, Waggoner's near inclusion in the series became a curious footnote among dedicated fans. He would go on to carve out a successful career elsewhere, most notably on The Carol Burnett Show and later as Steve Trevor in the Wonder Woman series alongside Linda Carter. His combination of comic timing, physical presence, and self-deprecating charm made him a household name throughout the 1970s. But what set Waggoner apart, especially in his later years, was his unusual foresight. As early as the 1980s, he realized the potential of satellite television and on-demand content. He co-founded Star Wagons, a company that rented customized trailers to Hollywood productions. It became wildly successful, serving A-list productions for decades and revolutionizing how stars lived on set. Despite his success in business, Waggoner remained proud of his acting roots. He frequently attended fan conventions and spoke warmly of his early days navigating pilot auditions, including the Lost in Space screen test that slipped through his fingers. There was no bitterness, only gratitude. On March 17, 2020, Lyle Waggoner passed away peacefully at his home in Westlake Village, California, after a battle with cancer. He was 84. Though he never wore a flight suit or battled Dr. Smith on screen, Waggoner's story is a reminder that not all losses are of those we knew, but sometimes of those who almost were. And in the orbit of Lost in Space, even a missed star can leave a lingering trail of light. 10. Irwin Allen, the visionary who built the ship but never escaped the fire. The Lost in Space universe would never have existed without the imagination and obsession of one man, Irwin Allen, the flamboyant producer, showrunner, and self-proclaimed master of disaster. Though not an actor, Allen's fingerprints were on every character, every alien planet, every explosion of smoke and spinning saucer that defined the show. His legacy shaped the futures of not just science fiction television, but many of the actors whose careers were forever linked to his vision. Born in 1916 in New York City, Allen began his career not in Hollywood, but in journalism. Yet his love for spectacle and his shrewd understanding of audience psychology quickly drew him to film. After dabbling in animal documentaries, he transitioned to full-scale entertainment, eventually creating a string of hit sci-fi series in the 1960s that would dominate afternoon reruns for decades. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, The Time Tunnel, Land of the Giants, and of course Lost in Space. Allen wasn't known for nuance. He prized spectacle over subtlety, volume over silence, and movement over meditation. But for children and young viewers, that was precisely the appeal. Rockets soared, monsters roared, and heroes were always just one laser blast away from certain doom. His shows were fun, colorful, and full of hope, no matter how ridiculous they sometimes became. Though he was notoriously demanding on set and rarely praised his cast publicly, many Lost in Space actors later admitted that Allen's iron will and enormous vision gave them the chance to reach audiences they never could have otherwise. Jonathan Harris once called him the mad scientist behind our madness. In the 1970s, Allen shifted his focus to disaster films, producing box office juggernauts like The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno. For a time, he was the king of catastrophe. But as the genre faded, so did his spotlight. Irwin Allen died on November 2, 1991, from a heart attack at the age of 75. Though some critics dismissed his work as campy or lowbrow, generations of fans knew better. He was a dream builder, a man who launched imaginations into orbit and gave countless actors, writers, and technicians their first steps into television history. He may never have appeared on screen, but every shadowy cave, every blinking console, every slow-tilting camera shot on Lost in Space was born from his unrelenting vision. And in that way, Irwin Allen will always be the first name listed on the ship's manifest, 11. Kurt Kasner, the original Lost commander from the pilot that was never aired before the Lost in Space we all know, with the Robinsons, the robot, and the unforgettable Dr. Smith, there was a very different version of the show. In the original unaired pilot, titled No Place to Hide, a different cast filled the Jupiter 2, and one of the most intriguing of those early faces was Kurt Kasner, cast as the original Dr. Smith-like authority figure, known then simply as Dr. Donald Smith. Kurt Kasner, born in 1913 in Vienna, Austria-Hungary, was a classically trained actor who fled Nazi-occupied Europe and eventually found success on Broadway and in Hollywood. He appeared in Mr. Roberts, The Happy Time, and The Cardinal, and was respected for his commanding stage presence, often portraying intellectual or aristocratic characters with a world-weary gravitas. Though No Place to Hide never aired as is, many scenes from it were recycled into the early episodes of Lost in Space, and Kasner's performance was quietly buried in studio vaults. When Irwin Allen revised the series to add more comedy, more color, and especially the iconic villainy of Jonathan Harris's Dr. Zachary Smith, Kasner's role was scrapped. Still, he remained connected to the world of Lost in Space, if only spiritually. As a performer, he represented the early ambitions of the show, to be serious, moody, and science-driven, rather than slapstick and melodramatic. His work offered a glimpse into what Lost in Space might have been under different creative conditions. Beyond his involvement with the pilot, Kasner continued acting throughout the 1960s and early 70s, taking on supporting roles in both film and television. His health began to decline, however, and he died of cancer on August 6, 1979, at the age of 65. Today, he's a footnote in the Lost in Space legacy, but one worth remembering. For in every show that makes it to air, there are countless versions that never see the light of day. Kurt Kasner's contribution reminds us of the shadows behind the spotlight and of the talents who helped shape the foundation before it ever launched. 12. Rita Shaw, the forgotten matriarch of guest star greatness. In the third season episode, The Space Destructors, viewers were treated to the rare appearance of a woman who, while not a series regular, left a lasting impression in her brief time on Lost in Space, Rita Shaw. Portraying the overbearing computer-generated figure, Instructor General, Shaw's presence brought both gravitas and unexpected humor to the bizarre storyline, an AI commanding Don and Doctor, Smith with maternal ferocity. To older audiences, however, Rita Shaw was already a familiar face. Born in 1912 in South Paris, Maine, Shaw had made a long career out of playing stern, no-nonsense women in film, television, and Broadway. She was a master of the strong supporting role, with appearances in classics like Mary Poppins as the cook, Mrs. Brill, the ghost, and Mr. Chicken, and the Music Man. Her signature booming voice and comedic timing made her a standout, even when given just a few lines. Her time on Lost in Space may have been brief, but it was emblematic of a greater truth. The success of the series didn't just rest on its stars. It relied on a rotating gallery of character actors, professionals like Shaw, who could bring absurd alien plots to life with dignity and flair. In real life, Shaw was beloved among her peers for her professionalism and wit. Never married, she dedicated herself entirely to her craft, continuing to work steadily throughout the 1960s and early 70s. Sadly, she passed away from emphysema on January 8, 1982, at the age of 69. Her legacy, like many in her profession, is often overlooked. But to those who remember the magic of television's golden age, Rita Shaw was a pillar of reliability, a performer who could command a scene whether she was playing a ghost, a housemaid, or a computer from the future. Her one moment aboard the Jupiter 2 may have been fleeting, but it stood tall, just like her unmistakable voice, and reminded us that even in the vastness of space, it's often the most human touches that make a world feel real. They were the faces and voices that guided us through galaxies unknown, the ones who made cardboard sets feel like alien worlds and gave soul to spacesuits, silver robots, and imaginary futures. One by one, they've left the screen behind, but never our memories. From Jonathan Harris's dazzling improvisations to Guy Williams's stoic heroism, to the unknown exhaustion of Bob May inside a boiling metal shell, to the off-screen grief that Angela Cartwright, Bill Mumy, and others still carry, each of them, lead or guest, heard or hidden, was a star in their own right. They may be gone from this world, but somewhere, in the collective imagination of every viewer who grew up watching Lost in Space, they're still out there, drifting through the cosmos, family intact, robot by their side, chasing the next sunrise on a faraway world. And so, as we close this voyage, we remember not just how they died, but how they lived, and how, in doing so, they helped us dream.